بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Okay, we have a request to come forward to make some more room in the back. Please recite 3 salawat and come forward. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we have a little bit less time to cover the topic. So I'm going to cover what I can today, and then inshallah we'll carry over tomorrow. So so far during these nights that I've been with you, we've been discussing these various paradigms, these models, and kind of ways of thinking that we sometimes take for granted. They surround us, they bombard us, they are woven into the information and the ideas that are constantly floating around us. Through news, through government policy, through our school system, it's all around us. It's part of the fabric of our society now. And we, as Muslims, we have a higher source of knowledge that can comment on those paradigms that are there to prevent us from taking them for granted. And we shouldn't take them for granted. We shouldn't accept them at face value, but we need to be critical of them and see whether they are acceptable or not, and only if they're acceptable Islamically should we accept them. Otherwise, we have something better through Islam. The paradigm I want to look at tonight, this is the 5th paradigm we looked at so far, is taken from a phrase from the Declaration of Independence, that all people are created equal. Right. So in the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." All right. So this is clear. That's something I think we even say very often, and we've adopted this idea into our own rhetoric. Sometimes I think unthinkingly. That's what I want to change. That we say it unthinkingly. We should think about what that actually means. What are the implications of it? Is it actually true? And on what levels is it true? And so forth. So I want to push this a little bit. So if you think about the meaning of the phrase, take it at face value. So I want to say this as well. So I have a lot of respect for Thomas Jefferson. And so I don't want to kind of imply that he said something simplistic and it's clearly wrong and he made a mistake. He was a very complex thinker, a very well-read person, and I have a lot more respect for someone than to just assume something simple when he probably meant something much more complex. However, the phrase itself is problematic. All men are created equal, right? And certainly the way we as an American people have taken that phrase and run with it, that is problematic. So leave Thomas Jefferson's intent aside, and let's not call him or his kind of ideas into question at this point, but just the idea itself that all men are created equal, all people are created equal. So let's ignore the fact that he wrote men, and in his time men were the ones who were important. Like in ancient Greece, we mentioned earlier, the democracy of ancient Greece was also free Greek men, right? Not women, not slaves. So in Jefferson's time and in the time of the Founding Fathers, it was also free white men who were counted. They're the ones whose vote mattered, whose opinion mattered, not women, not black slaves, and so forth. So we can edit that and change that to all people. Clearly, he would have said the same thing in modern times. Okay, so think about the implications of this claim that all people are equal. It's clearly, it should be very obvious if we compare any two people that we're not equal. Right, we're different in every single way you can think of, starting from superficial things like color and size and looks and strength and even abilities, skills, talents. Right, no two people are equal at all. So we definitely can't take that phrase at face value that all people are equal. We're not equal. We're different in every single way. As many people as there are, that's how many permutations of difference you have in the human race. So that should be clear that's definitely not what he intended, and that's definitely not a true statement to say that all people are equal in that sense. Okay. What we need to do then is to see what does the phrase mean? Is there any room for thinking about equality we should kind of go back and see why is equality so important for us, and why has this become such a catchphrase that we speak so freely. So there's some specific things that have happened in U.S. history, recent and not so recent, that I'm sure you're aware of, but I'll just bring that to the forefront to kind of give context to the idea and why this is such an important concept for Americans to kind of grasp onto this concept of equality. So one definitely is the civil rights movement. Right, we have a very kind of dark history of the way white immigrants to the country treated black immigrants to this country, right, and also red natives that were in the country, right. So the racism that was institutional for generations was obliterated by law, but then in this past century, in the previous century, it took a lot of work to at least build legal and social equality, and we're still struggling as a country to establish true equality of the races in all aspects of life. So that's one of the reasons why equality is such an important concept for us as Americans. The other reason I think is it goes back to that diversity of religions that we mentioned earlier as well. We talked about religion being subjective and not. One of the things I mentioned was that we living in a diverse society where people of all religions are living in such close contact with one another, we're constantly interacting. That diversity of religions leads to the potential for, especially in the case of religion, because exclusive religions, of which Islam is one, which believe that what we believe is true and other religions are false, right? If you have more than one religion that believes the same thing, then you can see there's clear room for conflict, and there's a room for people to assert superiority and then claim certain rights over others, claim status over others, because we believe in the truth and they believe in falsehood, therefore we are better. Right? So there's room for that, and so because of this diversity that we have and the possibility of that assertion of superiority, equality is very important, that we assert that regardless of differences of faith, in the secular society, we're not going to regard those differences of faith, and we're going to treat people equal no matter what their beliefs might be. Muslims sometimes jump on this bandwagon of saying all people are equal regardless of regardless of any sorts of differences. Right? That's what I want to call attention to and critique to some extent. So let me refer to this phrase that we have in Nahj al-Balagha. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when he sent his closest companion Malik al-Ashdad to Egypt, he sent with him a letter that has become a very important document for us. So there's a phrase in that letter that I want to quote for you. It's one that I'm sure all of you have heard before, if not have it memorized. In Arabic he says, وَأَشْعِرْ قَلْبَكَ الرَّحْمَةَ لِلرَّعِيَّةِ وَالْمَحَبَّةَ لَهُمْ وَاللُّطْفَ بِهِمْ وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ سَبُعًا ضَارِيًا تَغْتَنِمُ أَكْلَهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ صِنْفَانِ إِمَّا أَخٌ لَكَ فِي الدِّينِ وَإِمَّا نَظِيرٌ لَكَ فِي الْخَلْقِ. Okay, so he says, infuse your heart. Imam Ali is telling Malik al-Ashdad, infuse your heart with mercy, love, and kindness for your subjects. Do not be a voracious predator stalking them, seeking an opportunity to devour them. For they are in one of two categories. They are either your brothers in Islam or God's creatures like you. Okay, that last phrase, especially, that's what I want to focus on. That phrase, again, I'm sure it's a familiar phrase to you. That these people are either your brothers in Islam or God's creatures like you. Right? This is kind of unconventional to get audience participation, but what words do you think of when you hear that phrase? What phrases or words come to mind when you hear that phrase? People are either your brothers in faith, or in Islam, or God's creatures like you. Equality, right? What else? Everyone's created equal.
Brothers in creation.
People are all brothers in creation. Equality of all people is usually what is that pretty much the gist of it? Okay, so that's usually what we somehow get from this phrase, and very often this phrase is quoted And I think it's one of the most oft misquoted ahadith that we have. I want to make the claim to you that this phrase absolutely is not a phrase where Imam Ali is saying that all people are equal. In fact, just the opposite. He's created a hierarchy and saying that they're different. But there are certain things about how we should act with them. Okay? All right, so let me make this argument. So again, we have that phrase. We have a notion that oftentimes Muslims adopt, an interpretation oftentimes Muslims adopt from that phrase. I want to critique that notion and say that notion is wrong, and this phrase is very clearly saying something very different, not equality of all people. Right, don't get worried. We're going to get. The whole point is to challenge wrong notions, correct them, and then figure out, okay, now what? How do we go forward with that? How do we live with that? What are the consequences in our life? Right? So that resolution also has to come. I'm not, so please, if you ever, at the end of these lectures, if you feel confused, then you need to clarify that. That's partly why the Q&A is there. But if that's not satisfying, then please come to me. If you come away from the lecture with some sort of radical, violent idea, then clearly something's wrong. That's not at all what you're supposed to come away with. Okay? Right? If I'm challenging things, if I say something that sounds way off, then please challenge me, please come to me, and let's clarify. That's not at all the message of my speeches. It's simply to critique and then tweak our understanding, maybe even turn our understanding 180 degrees away. But it still should be, it's part of our beautiful teachings of Islam, which should make our lives more beautiful and ourselves more beautiful if we're practicing these. Okay, so first of all, there is there's some internal kind of contextual clues within this letter itself, within this passage I just quoted, that tell us that that's not what he means. So he doesn't mean equality of all people. And then there's also some, that idea of equality of all people, I'm going to claim it contradicts all of our basic Islamic teachings. I'll quote some verses in the Quran to show that. All right, so first of all, let's see some of the internal contradictions. Imam Ali, he said, infuse your heart with mercy, love, and kindness for your subjects. And that's how he started his phrase to Malik. All right, so he's speaking not of all humankind. He's sending Malik as the governor of Egypt to a particular populace of Egypt, his subjects there. Okay, those subjects, he's telling him, don't be like the previous rulers. The previous rulers, Amr bin As, he was Muawiyah's right-hand man, and he basically took Egypt, Muawiyah took Syria, and they had a party. They looted, they cheated, they deceived people for their own personal benefit. Don't be like them. Now finally, I'm in charge, you're now my governor going out there. Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr was a great person, but he wasn't able to do it, he was killed. Now you're going to go out there and you're the only person I have trust in who can settle affairs there. So the people of Egypt are the subject of the letter, not all humankind. All right, so who are the subjects in Egypt? Egypt is a Muslim land. It's a Muslim government ruling over it. In a Muslim land, you have three kinds of citizens. Only three categories of citizens who can live in Muslim lands. One are Muslims. Okay, so clearly Muslims are there. If they're not Muslims, then they have to fall into one of two categories in order to be a citizen of a Muslim land. One is that they can be Ahlul Dhimma, a Dhimmi. So a Dhimmi is a Christian or a Jew who, Ahlul Kitab, who agrees to abide by the rules of the Muslim land and basically enters into a sort of a contract with the Muslim government so that he can live in peace, practice his religion in private at least, but in public, for instance, they have to abide by Islamic etiquette, Islamic law. So their women, even though they may not believe in hijab, for instance, but in public, their women would have to observe hijab, whereas in private, they'd be free to do whatever they wanted. They could practice their religion privately, but not in the public forum, public forum. Yeah. So there's certain restrictions like that, but in exchange for those kind of concessions, they get to live peacefully, and they also get the benefit of being defended. Their lives and their property is defended by the Muslim security forces, whether it's police or military or whatever. Right, so that's the trade-off, and these people can live there as Ahlul Dhimma or Dhimmis. The third category are people known as Mu'ahadeen. So these are non-Christians and Jews, so mushrikeen, for instance, or followers of other religions besides Christianity and Judaism, non-Ahlul Kitab, kuffar, who also enter into an ahd, into a sort of a contract with the state, and they are allowed to live within certain bounds within the Muslim lands. Right, so these are the three categories of people that Malik is going to be dealing with in Egypt. So he's not talking about all humankind, but these three groups. So one of these groups is your brothers in Islam, the Muslims. The other two, the Ahlul Dhimma and the Mu'ahadeen, they fall into the other category that if they're not, even though they're not your Muslim brothers, at very least they're also creatures of God like you. Okay? So that's one internal clue that we have. We're not talking about all humankind, but we're talking specifically about these subjects that are there in Egypt. Another internal clue in the phrase that he uses. They are in one of two categories. They are either your brothers in Islam or God's creatures like you. Now this is not saying, therefore they're all equal. Read it carefully. He says that your subjects in Egypt are in one of two categories. One, just think about it, are your Muslim brothers, are they not creatures of God? Are they not God's creatures like you? They're also, of course, God's creatures like you, plus they're your Muslim brothers and sisters. Right? So he's making a hierarchy that you have one category of people who are your brothers in Islam, your Muslim brothers. Right? Say brethren to make it more inclusive, but he's speaking in Ismail language. Muslim brothers. Right? Everyone else who's lawfully residing in Egypt as a citizen of Egypt is at a second level. They're not your Muslim brothers, but at very least they are God's creatures. Right? So he's creating a hierarchy of first-class citizens versus second-class citizens, but still saying that all citizens of the state, they still deserve certain behavior on your part. They're not your prey to go and loot them and steal from them and do all the stuff to them. You have responsibility over them. You have to take care of them and all that stuff. All right. So it's not saying they're all equal, but it's saying despite their differences, despite this hierarchy of Muslims versus non-Muslims, you still have certain obligations. They still have certain rights as citizens of the state, and you have to observe those. Okay. So actually, it's very different than from a statement of unity of all people. It's saying actually that there's a hierarchy of people, right? That there are Muslims at a higher level, and then there are other people who are lesser than that. Okay, so those are some internal clues within the statement itself that show us that his intent is not this thing that this conclusion that we jump to, but rather something different. Let's look at some teachings that we have from the Quran, which establish a difference amongst people, a significant difference that matters amongst people. There's one verse, for instance, that says, in Surah Al-Zumar, verse 9, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Are those who know equal to those who don't know? Those who have knowledge, when in Islamic sources, in the Quran and Hadith, when they speak about knowledge, categorically, in every single instance and we've done a search of this, we've done we've gone through every instance of this, they always mean Islamic knowledge, meaning knowledge that gets you closer to God. Right? Knowledge, the word ilm is never used to mean secular knowledge that is kind of worldly. Right? So knowledge of grammar and mathematics and these sorts of things are not considered ilm in the language of the hadith and the Quran. When they say ilm, they're talking about those things that are fundamental to our knowledge of Allah, or those things that are going to get us closer to Allah. That's not to say those other things are not important. They're important secondarily because they help us to fulfill our duties towards God. Right? So if I need certain skills to be able to solve certain problems within our community, which are important. Our medical knowledge is vital. It's important. Not by itself. By itself, it doesn't get you closer to God. But if that medical knowledge helps you to cure people's sickness and prolong their life and promote their health, then secondarily, because of that good, it becomes something valuable that can help you. You end up serving God by helping people and by promoting their life. Right? So secondarily, it's important, but primarily it's not directly important in terms of getting you closer to Allah. The way, for instance, knowledge of Allah's attributes is, or knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? That kind of knowledge directly influences our closeness to Allah, and that's considered ilm. Anyway, so he says, are those people who know, who have knowledge of Islam, those who get us closer to Allah, like those who don't know? It's a rhetorical question. Absolutely, they're not equal. Those who know are greater than those who don't know. Another verse, أَفَمَنْ يَعْلَمُ أَنَّمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ الْحَقِّ كَمَنْ هُوَ أَعْمَى? Is he who knows that what has been revealed to you, O Muhammad, is truth, like the one who's blind? Spiritually blind, intellectually blind, not physically blind. Right? The one who recognizes that this is truth, is he the same as the one who's blind? Right? إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Only those who use their intellect understand this difference between these two. If you examine these two, you'll clearly see that the one who accepts the truth and follows the truth is better than the one who is blind and therefore rejects the truth. Another verse, أَفَمَنْ كَانَ مُؤْمِنًا كَمَنْ كَانَ فَاسِقًا. Here actually it's not even rhetorical, it's لَا يَسْتَوُونَ. The one who is a believer and righteous, is he like the one who's an unbeliever and a sinful? لَا يَسْتَوُونَ. Clearly they're not equal. There's no equivalence between the two. Another one, أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ مِنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أُولَٰئِكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. The one whose heart, whose capacity and is kind of literally whose chest has been expanded to accept Islam. So who's been given the capacity and the open-mindedness to accept Islam, is he like someone who's closed-minded and can't accept Islam? No, clearly they're not equal. And one more verse, it says, this is regard to marriage, it says, وَلَا تَنْكِحُ الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنْ. Right? Don't marry pagan, idol-worshipping women until they believe. Then he continues, he says, وَلَأَمَةٌ مُؤْمِنَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكَةٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ. If you're looking for marriage, for an appropriate spouse, as men, he says, even a believing slave, right? In society, slaves were the lowest echelons of society. Even a believing slave, who socially is at the bottom rung of society, is better for you than a pagan, even if that pagan be beautiful, wealthy, have great character, whatever it is. Right? The slave who's a believer is better for you than anyone else. Right? Anyone else if they're not a believer. And then he turns it around and he says, وَلَا تُنْكِحُ الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنْ. And don't marry mushrik men to your women. وَلَا عَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَكُمْ. Because a believing male slave is better than a mushrik, no matter how good he might be and how much he appeals to you. Right? So it says that clearly there's a distinction, and one is better than the other. One is more appropriate than the other, one is more suitable as a spouse than the other. Okay. So the challenge then is, so clearly that phrase from Imam Ali is not saying all are equal. There's some internal clues we looked at. We looked at verses of the Quran which establish that there are differences amongst people, and there are things that make certain people better than others. So the question is not, are we equal or are we not equal? The answer to that is clear, that people are not equal. We're different in so many ways. The right question to ask is, what differences amongst us matter? What differences that do exist are actually important differences and distinctions that actually, in God's eyes, make some people better and some people worse? Clearly we know that race does not matter. Clearly we know that sex does not matter. Clearly we know that height and strength and all these other things, even skills and talents, these things don't matter in Allah's eyes. Right? So there's certain qualities, and these verses mention some of those. Knowledge of God is one of those things that makes you better than someone who doesn't have knowledge of God. Accepting the truth when you see it, when you realize it's the truth, that makes you better than someone who rejects truth even though he understands it's the truth. We have the verse, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Right, so taqwa is one of those things that makes you closer to Allah, more valuable in Allah's eyes than other people. That being said, that doesn't give us license to assert superiority. Right? All of these qualities, categorically, all of these qualities are qualities that are hidden. They manifest themselves in our life and in our interactions and our words, But they're not qualities that we can weigh in any empirical way and say, he has 10 points of taqwa and he has 9 points of taqwa, so he's better than him. We can't judge that, right? But it does give us a standard to know what qualities are important, what qualities actually, if we want to become better people in Allah's eyes, what qualities should we be after? If we want to make a judgment between people, not a judgment where we're going to, a judgment for practical purpose. Sometimes we need to make a judgment for instance, who am I going to trust more than, who am I going to trust with my money, for instance? Who am I going to trust with my daughter or with my son as a spouse? Right? Who am I going to trust as a business partner? Right? So for these kinds of things, we do end up making judgments anyway. Part of that, we have no qualms about making judgments based on skills, based on credentials, based on other things, which are, of course, important based on, if you're looking for someone to fill a job, for instance, you have to look at skills and credentials and stuff like that, right? But if we're looking for who's closer to Allah, who's going to be more trustworthy, who's going to be a better spouse for myself, for my children, and in those instances, what's most important is that we look at these standards of knowledge of Allah, true devotion to Allah, fear of Allah, and these kinds of things. Those are the things that really matter. Those are the differences that really matter. But we shouldn't fall into this trap of thinking that it sounds very good to say all people are equal, so let's just say that. Because it's not a true statement. Not only is it a false statement in reality, because we recognize that there are differences amongst people, but it's also not true because there are very clear standards that we have that differentiate people and make some people in Allah's eyes better than others. We shouldn't gloss over those and say, no, we're all equal somehow. And sometimes I've even seen this, and I've heard this in rhetoric, and that's why I think it's so important to say it. You have these non-discrimination clauses that different company organizations will have, especially non-profits. They usually have this sort of thing. Actually, I quoted one phrase. I wrote down one phrase from the HHS a website. The department does not tolerate discrimination by its employees based on any non-merit factor, including race, good, national origin, good, color, good, religion. Okay. That's fine. It's a government organization from a secular perspective. That is true. We also, I want to speak hopefully tomorrow about rights, and the fact that we have, Thomas Jefferson continues and asserts that we have these inalienable rights, or unalienable rights as he writes in the Declaration, right? So that is good, and we expect that we're going to be treated equally to other followers of other religions, right? But that's not the same thing as saying that all the followers of religions, no matter what they are all equal. Right? And sometimes they said it carefully, they said it correctly. But sometimes we as Muslims, we say it incorrectly. And I've actually heard this from a prominent speaker, where he also put religion in there when he was saying, all people we're all brothers and sisters, we're all equal. There's no difference between one person and another based on color, race, all these things, and religion. He threw religion in there. I don't know if it was a slip of the tongue, but I don't think it was because of his history and other things I've heard from him. That there's no distinction amongst people based on religious belief. Then where is هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ أَفَمَنْ كَانَ مُؤْمِنًا كَمَنْ كَانَ فَاسِقًا لَا يَسْتَوُونَ. A believer is clearly not the same as someone who's sinful, who rejects God, who's an enemy of God. Right? So we have to be careful that we don't jump on this bandwagon before we understand which wagon we're jumping on. Recite with salawat, please. Let me just zoom out a little bit. So this is one phrase that we often misquote. This is we do this with several phrases. There are a couple of phrases that we have in the Quran and other places that we sometimes do this with, where we're so eager to please, we're so eager to let everyone know that we like everyone, that we twist around the teachings of Islam. Right? Being nice and kind and compassionate to people is one thing. That's a value that we have. That's in its place. That's correct. But then to say that people are all, that Islamically we believe that people who reject God are the same as people who accept or believe in God? Absolutely not. The people who follow a false religion, especially if it's knowingly, right, are the same as people who are devoted to Allah and are Muslim? Absolutely not. Does that mean we have to be mean to them? No. Does that mean we have to show enmity towards them? No, that's not the case either. Those are the consequences I'm talking about that we need to talk about more. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll get to those, right? But at least at this level, theoretically and in terms of our values, we need to be very clear that there are thing, there are differences, first of all, and then there are differences that matter in Allah's eyes, that do make certain people better than other people in Allah's eyes. They're not the things that we sometimes think. They're not money and race and lineage and these kinds of things, but they are those really important values of knowledge of God and belief and piety and good deeds, these kinds of things, which actually do matter. So let me just mention one other phrase. There's one verse in the Quran that's often misquoted. Surah Al-Baqarah, I believe it's verse number 62. It's on the top of the left page in the Uthman Quran. It says, إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى والصابئين من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وعمل صالحا فلهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. So it says those who believe, and the Jews and the Christians, إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى and the Sabians, those who believe, right? So those who believe, the Christians, the Jews, the Sabians. That's like an ellipsis. Those who believe and do good deeds, then they will have no fear and they'll receive their reward. So oftentimes people jump to the conclusion, they're so eager to say, oh, everyone's equal, there's no distinction in religion. They'll say, see, this verse says those who believe, Christians, Jews, and Sabians, they're all going to have their reward. There's no fear for them, meaning they're not going to be punished. That's not what the verse is saying. In Arabic, that's not what the verse is saying. In Arabic, very clearly, there's something that's missing. That's very clear to someone who knows Arabic. It's sometimes we omit things because it's so clear, right? Even in every language, it's a universal thing, right? So it's actually إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَى وَالصَّابِئِينَ مَنْ آمَنَ مِنْهُمْ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. That minhum is not there, but it's clearly implied. There's no doubt for anyone who knows Arabic that minhum is there, and it's clear to anyone who knows the Quran. The Quran has not come to say it doesn't matter what religion you follow, Christian, Jew, whatever, you got your reward. It's clearly not the message of the Quran. The verse itself also says Christians, Jews, believers, Christians, Jews, Sabians, any of them who believes. When the Quran says belief, and iman and mu'min and these types of things, it's not saying that they believe in something. Believe in anything and you're good to go. That's not the message. When it says mu'min, it means the same thing as Muslim. Someone who believes in Islam, in the Prophet and all of the teachings that he's brought. That's a mu'min in the Quranic terminology. So it's saying anyone, no matter what religion you came from, it mentions a couple of samples. Once you believe and become a Muslim, then you're set. What this verse is trying to do is trying to stop the discrimination that the early Muslims were thinking was appropriate. Umar ibn Khattab, he really brought this to the forefront. During his Khilafah, he instituted this whole idea of differentiating amongst Muslims based on their previous religious affiliation and based on their tribal affiliation and these sorts of things, and when they became Muslim. Those who were from Quraysh and were Muslim were at the top of the tier. Of course, he's in that category. For instance, other tribes of Arabs would be below that. The Persians would be below that, and like that they had, and based on that, there would be certain privileges that would be given more to the people at the top and less to the people at the bottom, including certain payments that would be made from the Baytul Mal to all citizens of the state. But the ones at the top would get more, the ones at the bottom would get less. That's one of the things that Imam Ali swore to abolish. When he became the Khalifa, he said, I'm going to follow, I'll accept this, now that you're demanding it of me, I'll accept this position if you accept that I follow the Sunnah of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. And I'm not going to follow the Sunnah of the Shaykhain, of Abu Bakr and Umar. Right? I'm going to divvy up the Baytul Mal equally. Right? That's the bone of contention that Talha and Zubayr had. They were in that top category. They're the top tier. All of a sudden, they come to get their old shares, like Umar used to give them from Ali, thinking he's our best friend. We've been supporting him all these years. We were there against Abu Bakr in the beginning, and he gives them exactly the same as slaves who are Muslim, and they're shocked. They say, if this is your justice, right? You're not going to repay us for all of our loyalty and all of our this and that. Then we're not going to be with you. They leave, go to Mecca, go to Basra, launch a war, and fight the Battle of Jamal with him. Okay, so this verse then is counteracting or preempting that kind of thinking. That if you're if you're an early Muslim or you're a Qurashi who became a Muslim, then you're somehow better than the Christian who became a Muslim, the converts. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have that. Maybe we can also learn a lesson from this. In our communities, we should make sure that we don't consider converts to be somehow less than us if we're born into Islam. That I've known Islam since I was born. This person's just learned Islam, therefore I'm somehow better than him, right? If you know more than him, if you're closer to Allah than him, that's one thing. But all that does is create a greater burden on you to teach him more, be more compassionate to him, that sort of stuff. It doesn't give us the right to act superior to him. But anyway, so this verse is saying, whatever your religious affiliation was before, it doesn't matter. Once you're a Muslim, your slate is wiped clean, and now you're all equal. If you believe in Allah, believe in the last day, and you do good deeds, you're set. You get your reward, and you'll have no reason to fear it. Yeah? It's not a statement of equality of all religions and religious non-discrimination. Okay, let me stop there and entertain questions. Yes, sister.
So I've heard from Assalamu alaikum, first of all, first. I've heard before that you will only enter heaven if and only if you believe in the way I am Amir Mu'min. And then I've also heard that if you do good deeds, doesn't matter who you believe in, just like what you're contradicting right now, that you'll go to heaven. Where does the walaya come into? Like, is that accurate? Is that not accurate? Is that just superstition? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that is accurate. So she's asking about the kind of precondition of believing in the wilaya, the authority of the Ahlul Bayt. Is that a precondition for instance, for paradise or for salvation? So yes, clearly that is from ahadith. We know that's definitely the case, right? There are ahadith that say that, for instance, the acceptance of deeds is contingent upon someone's belief in the wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt. Okay. That's the. If you remember go back to that same discussion. Because that all of a sudden that puts people in an uncomfortable position because they think, well, how can we say Sunnis are not going to, their prayers not going to be accepted? They're also weeping in front of Allah, and they're also doing this. So this statement is not. We're not again passing judgment and saying every Sunni is for instance going to hell or whatever. We're not saying that. We're saying this is the line of what's truth and what's falsehood. Truth is accepting the teachings of the Prophet in its entirety. This whole package of guidance Allah has given, that's truth, and anything else is falsehood. If you pick and choose and say, I like 99% of the teachings, but I don't like this 1%, then you're a kafir. You've rejected the entire thing. Just like we can't, لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله. Right, we're not allowed to pick and choose between the prophets and say, I like most of the prophets, but John the Baptist or Isa, I don't really like him. We can't pick and choose and say, I like this, I don't like this. They're all guides of Allah. We have to accept all of them as Allah's guides. The package of guidance is important. Otherwise, we're doing what Shaitan did. Right? Shaitan also picked and chose, and he liked most of what Allah had said. He'd been worshipping Allah for millennia. Imam Ali says he was worshipping for 6,000 years. One sajda of his was 6,000 years, Imam Ali says. And he says, I don't even know if it was like 6,000 years of this world or some other calculation of years. Right? But then when it comes to bowing down to Adam, all of a sudden his pride comes to the fore and he says, no, this one thing I'm not going to do. Anything else I'll do it. Even makes a deal with Allah. He says, I'll worship you in a way that nobody else has or ever will be able to worship you, but just forgive me from this one thing. Allah says, Al-ibadatu kama urid, la kama turid. Right? Worship me the way I want you to worship me, not the way you want to worship me. Right? So if we pick and choose, that's the problem. So that's the line between truth and falsehood. But that's not to say that everyone who's following false teachings is condemned. For the same reason we mentioned the other day, right? There's a difference between truth and falsehood and judgment. It's possible that a Sunni, for instance, or a non-Muslim could be excused before Allah, has a legitimate excuse before Allah to say, I didn't know. No Shia, I had Shia friends, they never once told me all these things that they knew. And they always told me, oh, you're our brother in faith and we're all the same and all this stuff. And so I believed it. Your Shia misguided me. If they had told me that this is what we know, this is the truth, then I would have followed it. Maybe it's our fault as Shia. Right? Or they have some other legitimate excuse. So the excuses and how Allah is actually going to judge them is a separate matter. But the truth is a kind of if all is with all else being equal, if in an ideal situation, yes, if everyone has full disclosure, everyone has full knowledge, then yes, this is one of the requirements for acceptance. I lost track of your second question with all my ranting.
I was just gonna ask, those people that there's people you argue with and they would still reject Imam Ali alayhi salam after they know, like even in Sunnah Hadith, like, they know how great he is and just things like that. Like, so I guess like Allah's gonna judge each person based on.
Yeah, so the judgment is Allah's. All we can do is to keep trying, to keep in a very level-headed, rational way, historically accurate way, to do the best that we can. Live as a Shi'i, a true follower of the Ahlul Bayt, and do your best to try to let people know. And then everything else nothing else is our problem after that. So, can we get some of the younger people first?
Oh, that's
Usually I give you the first question, but let me give some of the other people the first question. I saw a couple other hands.
Young people?
Okay.
the Jefferson's statement that all man created equal actually doesn't contradict Islam's teaching about Allah created human believing on the fitrah, right? And then his parents or the environment change him into something different.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. That's part of my goal to talk about what is common, what equality do we actually have, and then what things do actually matter. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail tomorrow. Inshallah.
And the other one, the verse you quoted about in Lazina Amanu, it follows Lazina Billahi wal Yawm al Akhir, right?
Right.
So there is no mention of the Prophet there, because to be Muslim you have to believe in Allah and the Prophet. So if it was meant you have to be a Muslim in order for these to apply, then why that verse Allah did not put the Prophet in there? He put only believe in Allah and the.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the commentators say is that he's mentioning. So the question is in that verse it mentions belief in Allah. The verse that I mentioned at the end, that those who believe and are Christian and Jew, once they believe in Allah and the Day of Judgment, and do good deeds, then there's reward for them. So he doesn't mention belief in the Prophet, so he's arguing that therefore he's not referring to Muslims in the strict sense, it's relating to monotheists who also believe in the hereafter. So that's clearly not the case. The commentators say that these two particular things have been singled out for mention as two of the key beliefs that people have problems with. Right? Belief in Allah as the one God was a major problem for the mushrikeen. Right, and mushrikeen are no small, about 60% or 50% of human population right now. Right, so what are we at, 6 billion people? So 3 billion people still are mushrik. If you look at statistics and stuff, you count all the Hindus and Taoists and all the Confucianists, all the different religions that are out there, it's about 50% of the world's population is still mushrik. So still, it's still a major problem today. So that's one major problem of faith, and the other is the belief in the Day of Judgment. The Jews in particular, at that time, they had a problem with their belief in the Day of Judgment. And even today, people have problems with that. So these are two key beliefs that Islam teaches that he puts a finger on. Not to say that's all that's required. Right? In general, categorically, in the Quran, whenever it mentions Iman and Mu'min, it's referring to what we now call a Muslim. Right? Meaning someone who believes in the teachings of the Prophet. It says the Shahadatain. That's the definition of a mu'min in the Quran's usage of the word. Yes, sister.
Thank you for your speech and your time. I have first a small remark about Jefferson's speech and then a question. I don't know what was in his mind, and I don't think anybody can say that, but usually when they talk in political theory about equality, it's meant more justice than equality.
Yes.
And there's a big difference between this. And yes, we, even in Islam, not all people are born equal. There are also different steps in heaven, different steps in hell, so it's not about equality.
Yes.
But even Imam Ghazali advised to the person that he sent to Egypt, it was about justice, to be just to all people,
Right.
even if they are not Muslims. Mainly because we don't know by heart, since we don't have the knowledge of ghaib, we don't know what's in the hearts of people. Even if I say I'm a Muslim, even if it's in my passport, even if I'm wearing hijab, I might not be a true Muslim. So it's about justice to people. It's not about the equality or to treat everybody equal. When we talk about equality, it's about the...
Can I just cut you? That's all perfect. So inshallah, we're going to talk about those kinds of things tomorrow in terms of rights. Right? Today was about equality, right? And the implication of equality is how do we, or inequality is if people are unequal, what do we do about it? How do we treat people based on rights and justice?
So my question about inequality is this: what does it do to my current life now? Like if people are exactly unequal because some are more faithful than others. As a person, me, normal person, who doesn't know ilm al-ghaib, who doesn't know, and who doesn't also care about judging people, because this is God's job to judge people, what does equality and inequality that you are talking about do me in my life now?
Right. Yeah, that's a great segue for tomorrow's lecture. Inshallah, we'll discuss this tomorrow. That's the important next step after we understand this concept, to say, okay, now how do I act on this, or does it have any implications in my life or not?
Because I'm afraid that sometimes this inequality
Exactly,
of
yeah.
people creates superiority.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah. So I tried to address all that.
like
So that's not the intention. That's not what we should take away from it. But how we act on this now, that's something that we have to discuss in more detail. Yes, sister.
أكو مجموعة توجد مجموعة
Please ask in English, sorry.
توجد مجموعة من العرب هنا في الحسينية لا يستطيعون الاستفادة من المحاضرة لأنهم لا يجدون التكلم باللغة الإنجليزية، فنرجو أنه تكون ترجمة على الشاشة حتى نفهم ونشارك في المحاضرة.
Yeah, that's a good thing to take up with the administration. So she's saying that there are a lot of people who speak other languages who don't understand, and so there should be some sort of translation. So that's some logistical issue that maybe people can.
Sheikh, I would appreciate if you repeat the question so we understand.
I did. Yeah, that's she was asking for a translation because there are people who don't understand English. So that's something that the society has to decide how to deal with that. Yeah, Abbas?
We have a request for clarification from a hadith that you had given in your first night, where you had talked about the 4,000 angels and they came too late.
Right.
A couple of people have requested if you can clarify that hadith, because
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so Brother Siddiq has also asked about this. So there was one hadith from Imam Rida alayhi salam. So at one point he had mentioned that there are 4,000 angels who had come to help Imam Hussein, and they saw that he had already been killed, and they're the ones who are mourning him and going around his grave and sorts of things. So what I understand is that we have other hadith that mention what happened before. What Imam Rida is mentioning is kind of what happened at the end of that story. So we have different hadith that mention that there are armies of angels. I believe it was 4,000, it might have been more or less, I can't remember the numbers in other hadith, where they had come to offer their assistance. Allah had sent them to offer their assistance to help Imam Hussein and kind of make up the difference in the two armies. And Imam Hussein had rejected their help and said, in his own wisdom, he decided that's not in the best interest of my cause to have supernatural help to wipe out the enemy. This has to be a human battle and a kind of a normal battle for it to have its effect. And so he rejected their help, and so they left. And then I believe those ahadith also mentioned that they came back a second time after he had been killed, and then they mourned him, and now they're still there around the grave. So Imam Rida alayhi salam is just mentioning the tail end of that. He didn't mention, in this particular hadith, he didn't mention the fact that they come earlier as well. So we shouldn't think that, first of all, assuming that this hadith is correct, we shouldn't assume that Allah didn't know or made a mistake, or the angels made a mistake or something like that. That's not the case. He was just mentioning the tragic part, that they came after he had been killed, and then they came, so all they could do was just to mourn him. So yeah, we have actually a Q&A session at the end after dinner, I think 9:40. I believe it's 9:40 or something. So after dinner. So maybe we can shift, other questions. I know it's a lot of ideas, and some of them are new ideas. So it's really important that you clarify them. Inshallah, we can carry it over because there's more of the program that